Welcome back to the kitchen. I'm your host, Rob Witcher. This is my sous chef, Patrick Dwyer. Today we'll be cooking spaghetti.
While we cook, we will focus on the science behind it all. So let's get cooking. Our first step was pouring 20 cups of water into our pot. However, by our 12th cup, we realized our pot was too small, so we switched to a bigger pot.
After we reached the full 20 cups, we moved the pot to the burner and turned it up to high heat, and this brings us to our first principle, specific heat capacity. Specific heat capacity is when liquids have a certain amount of heat required to raise a temperature by a given amount, which is typically 1 degree. It is an intensive physical property unique for every substance, represented by C in Q equals Cm delta T. Water has a specific heat capacity of 4.184 joules per grams over Celsius.
When we first heat up the water, it begins to go from the liquid state to the gaseous state. The difference between the various states of matter is as follows. Solids have compact molecules with a defined volume and shape. Liquids have flowing molecules with a defined volume while taking the shape of its container. Gases have free-moving molecules with a shape and volume of its container. When we put the lid over the pot of boiling water, the vapor pressure increased. Vapor pressure is the force a gas emits on its condensed phases in a closed container, in this case, the liquid water. Because a minimal amount of vapor can escape, the force between the vapor and liquid is much stronger than before. Once the water had reached a full boil, Rob poured in the noodles.
Our third principle is types of energy. The types of energy is radiant energy, convection, and conduction. Radiant energy is the electromagnetic and gravitational radiation energy. Convection is the transfer of heat energy by the movement of the molecules of a gas, liquid, or vapor. Convection transfer of energy cannot take place in a solid because there must be a flow of a current allowing the dispersion of molecules. Conduction is the process by which heat or electricity is directly transmitted through a substance when there is a difference of temperature or of electrical potential between adjoining regions without movement of the material.
Fine. Alright, go ahead. Rob began stirring the noodles to try to get them to absorb the water and sink to the bottom. Once Rob had stirred the noodles, they sunk to the bottom. The noodles absorbed the heat from the water when submerged. This process is known as heat transfer. Normally, this happens with a transfer from something with a high temperature to something with a low temperature. This process changes the internal energy of both systems. Next, we drained the noodles and poured them into a separate bowl. To go on top of our noodles, Rob stirred the sauce before sticking it into the microwave to heat it up. Once we began putting the noodles into their own separate bowls, we realized that we had not buttered the noodles and they therefore stuck together and were hard to move. Do you think we should have butter or something?
Probably something.
Once we had added butter, the noodles were far easier to put into their own separate bowls.
Now the noodles will slip out. Now they're not sticky.
Yay. Good work. Once the sauce was finished microwaving, we put it onto the noodles and got ready to eat. Then we taste tested it. think we did a good job.
Yeah.